Hello, this is Victoria Bragonier, and I'm the Policy Director for the Alliance for Progressive Virginia, and today we are interviewing Senator John Edwards, who represents Virginia's 21st District, and I want to say thank you, Senator Edwards, for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Victoria. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks. So first off, could you talk a little bit about yourself, give us a short bio, and then a description of the 21st District?
Well, I was elected to the Senate in 1995, and I've been reelected 6 times now. The Senate District is Roanoke City, part of Roanoke County, most of Montgomery County, and all of Giles County. It's a combination of a rural district and an urban district. So I have all the kind of issues urban areas would have, and then a lot of the issues that the rural areas would have too. So it's a fun district. I like it and enjoying it very much. And part of the district includes, of course, Virginia Tech, and that's a lot of fun representing a major university like that.
Well, that sounds like a large, just totally different opposite ends of the spectrum. You've got rural, you've got urban, you've got tech with the Virginia Tech. It sounds like you've got a lot of interesting and challenging things probably to deal with.
That's true. The whole spectrum of issues that relate to rural as well as urban and to some extent suburban areas too. But the most important part, I think, is the fact that I have Virginia Tech and what Tech is doing along with Korean hospital system. They've combined to put together Korean Virginia Tech Korean School of Medicine and a Virginia Tech Korean Research Institute, and they are just booming. We opened up the School of Medicine 6 years ago. I think the third class is going to be graduating this May from the School of Medicine, 42 students. Imagine a School of Medicine in Roanoke.
That's exciting.
It is exciting. Virginia Tech is able to draw down a lot of research dollars, Korean, of course, the hospitals and the patients, and so it's very exciting. But the Research Institute is also very exciting. They're in the process of creating what is known as an innovation district, to do research on a lot of biomedical issues, autism, Alzheimer's, the brain. It's going to be, the Roanoke Valley could become the brain research capital of America in a few years. In fact, I'm working right now on doubling the size of the Research Institute with a $48 million request for capital funding to build another building. They have 25 different teams of scientists that are now working on a whole host of issues in the whole biomedical field. So that's very exciting for this area and also for the Commonwealth.
Yes, that sounds wonderful. So it sounds like the whole Virginia Tech region will be like the place to go to if you have brain-specific issues.
That's right. They brought in 250 research scientists already, and we're looking to bring in maybe another 250 research scientists once we build, we hope, the next building, which hopefully will be built starting next fall if we get the funding. So this is really very, very important. So Roanoke, the whole region is transforming from, I guess you could say, the old industrial age where railroad was king. The headquarters of the Norfolk and Western Railway was in Roanoke. And now, of course, they moved to Norfolk when they merged with the Southern Railroad. So Roanoke is still a railroad town, but it's moved from being predominantly an industrial town with railroading, General Electric, and other types of industrial industries to let's call it the new information age, the new digital age, and where research and innovation is king. And I think that's where the new economy is going. You know, progress and prosperity has always been based upon innovations. In fact, starting with James Watt, who invented the steam engine in the 1750s. You know, that was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There was an innovation that led to the railroad and the steam engine and the steamboats. And now we're in the 21st century where innovation on cyber, in the cyber world, computers, and the like, this is where we're going. And in the field of biomedicine, that's going to be the next level of innovations, which is going to bring progress and prosperity, but also improvements in people's lives. And that's the most important thing. So I'm very excited to represent an area that's right at the forefront of this cutting-edge technology of science and medicine and marrying them together.
Well, that's wonderful. I look forward to see what comes out of all that. That'll be great.
We have brought in Michael Friedlander, a PhD from Houston, back in about 8 years ago, who opened up the Research Institute and brought in all these scientists from all over the world. They're really all young, energetic, brilliant scientists from places like Harvard, Duke, and Georgia Tech, and Stanford, and all over the world, really, to come to Roanoke. And a lot of them said when they came, they had no idea where Roanoke was, but once they saw what it looks like and what a great place it is to live and what we were doing there in terms of their research opportunities, they're very excited to live there.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad to hear it. That's great.
But that's because Virginia Tech and Roanoke are doing a lot of things together, and I represent both. So I'm very excited about it.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's turn to some of your other duties. You're a legislature here at the legislature. You are an attorney in private practice. But one of the things that you do is you're a chairman of the Virginia Code Commission.
That's
I want to ask you about that because I had, to be honest with you, I had never heard of the Code Commission until this very session, and so I was hoping you could talk about that and educate our listeners more about what it does.
Well, the Code Commission is one of those commissions that people don't hear much about, but it's very important because we are constantly updating the Code of Virginia, getting rid of obsolete laws, revising whole titles of the Code this year. The higher education title 23 of the Code was revised. It took us 2 years to go through it, to reorganize it, to update the language, get rid of, let's say, obsolete provisions and so forth. So it's a very important commission, but it's not one that people know much about. One of the things, it gives me an opportunity as chairman, though, to do things that I might not have been able to do otherwise. For example, in 2012, I was able to put through a bill for the first time in Virginia, to create a code of evidence. By the rules of evidence in the court system had been based upon common law, case law. If you want to know what the hearsay rules were, we'll look it up in the various cases and try to figure it out yourself. And there were some treatises about that. But up until 2012, it turns out Virginia was one of only 2 states that didn't have rules of evidence that were compiled in a code. And so, working with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, we together kind of decided we need to do something about this. And so I convinced the Code Commission to go along. We had some professors who were working on this anyway. And so we brought them in and explained to the Code Commission how rules of evidence would improve the system, make it easier for lawyers and judges, have more consistency in applying rules of evidence, because we learned that judges were not applying rules of evidence in a consistent fashion. So I went ahead and pushed it through the Code Commission and sponsored the bill in the Senate, and we got it passed. But it wouldn't have happened had I not been in a position as chairman of the Code Commission and knowing the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to sit down together and figure out how to do it, because we both realized this is something we needed to do. So there are things like that as chairman of the Code Commission I'm in a position to do and initiate some ideas that might not get done otherwise. So it's an important commission. Some people think it's more like a semicolon police commission. In fact, the former chairman, Justice Mims, kidded about the fact that he nicknamed the Code Commission the semicolon police, making sure everything was written properly and the Code of Virginia is well organized. And I think it's really a lawyer's commission. That it's kind of, I think it'd be hard to be on the commission without being a lawyer. So it's the kind of thing lawyers get a kick at doing, but the average person would wonder, why in the world would you want to do that? But it is an important commission.
It sounds like it. Yeah, that's amazing that up until just recently, the state of Virginia didn't have its own evidence rules in the code. That's amazing to me.
It's kind of interesting if you want to give you the history more than what you want to know, but back in the late 70s, the Supreme Court had Congress authorized the Supreme Court to have federal rules of evidence in the federal system. In the 80s, most states followed suit and had their own rules of evidence, but by just a few years ago, only Virginia and Massachusetts, can you believe that, were the only states that did not have formal rules of evidence. You'd have to go look at the common law and try to figure it out yourself. And so now we do have rules of evidence. I think it's very helpful to judges and lawyers alike.
I think you're exactly right. I'm glad that you took care of that. Well, I wanted to ask you, since you are the chairman on the Code Commission, I know that you're aware that a lot of bills have now been sent to your commission to hear once the General Assembly session's over. And some of those is a large block of LGBTQ bills. Now, and actually APV had a bill that actually got put in that block. It's the bill banning conversion therapy. So how do you foresee all those blocks of bills falling under what you guys do?
Well, the Code Commission tries not to make policy, but rather to make sure the code is technically in good shape and organized and easy to use, is user-friendly. So when we have bills that deal with policy issues, we try to separate the policy component from just the more technical component. For example, Senator Eben gave us a bill last year about modifying the language in the code with regard to marriage. Husbands are not always, husbands and wives. Who can marry?
Right, exactly.
When you deal with same-sex marriages, some of the language doesn't necessarily work. And so we're going through it right now. In fact, we hope to have had a bill this year to modernize the Code of Virginia with regard to laws relating to marriage. And it turned out we were not able to get there. In the last meeting we had, I guess it was in November or December, we decided that there's some parts of this that still needed working on, and we decided to put it off to the next year. So hopefully next year we'll have a bill, a comprehensive bill that goes through the entire code and changes the language to update it so that the code doesn't distinguish between, he and she and things like that. In the case of same-sex marriage, sometimes you have to update the language of the code. But again, that's technical. So we're not going to be making policy. We try not to. We like to say we don't make policy unless we want to make policy. But then when we do, we clarify, we explain, in this bill, this part is policy. So the committees of the General Assembly understand what we're doing and that we're not trying to sneak something through without explaining exactly what we're doing. So we'll take a look at every one of those bills. But again, we try not to make policy. That's up to the General Assembly itself.
I understand. I understand. Okay. Well, I'd like to turn to some of the legislation that you sponsored this session. So first, I'd like to ask you about SB 129, which was the minimum wage increase that it increases the currently federally mandated level to $8 an hour.
Well, if you were to, the current federal minimum wage is $1.25, and Virginia's not any higher than that. And if you go back to 1968, the minimum wage adjusted for inflation would be about $22,000 a year, as opposed to the current minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is about $15,000 a year if you work full time, one person working full time. So it's about $7,000 less adjusted for inflation on an annualized basis. One of the big people are now talking about at the national level and every level the fact that minimum wage and middle income wages have been stagnant for a long, long time. The ultra wealthy are doing just fine, thank you very much, but the rest of the people are not.
Yes.
And as somebody once said, yes, the unemployment rate is down, more people are back to work, but with lousy jobs, they're not getting paid, is what they ought to be paid. And so some of us think that we need to, in order to improve the economy, but also improve the lives of people at the lower level, adjust the minimum wage. And my bill was really fairly modest. Go first year to $8, the next year $9, third year $10.10. Of course, it didn't pass. Straight party line vote. It was defeated. But we really need to move forward to the $15 an hour. That's kind of the national, what people are talking about at the national level. I'm not sure that would work in Virginia. And you got to consider the fact that not every part of Virginia is Northern Virginia. In Northern Virginia, the cost of living is much higher in the D.C., Maryland area. Every state around Virginia, I believe just about every state, if not all of them, have actually adjusted the minimum wage above federal minimum wage. So just because the feds haven't done anything doesn't mean we shouldn't. And I think we need to continue talking about it because people, for a number of reasons, if one is, for example, unless you're making federal minimum wage level or above, you can't get Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion money would go to people living below the federal minimum wage. If you're making federal minimum wage or 4 times that, you can get subsidy to buy private health insurance on a sliding scale. If you live below the federal minimum wage, you can't get the subsidy to buy private health insurance. And you can't get Medicaid money because we didn't expand Medicaid, so you're being treated as a second-class citizen. If you can raise the minimum wage, that would help people to buy private health insurance, and more people could buy private health insurance. So it's important for a whole lot of reasons. People just can't make it anymore, and people are stuck in poverty, and it's very sad. It would help businesses too, because when people at the lower end of the income level get an extra nickel, what do? They spend it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the wealthy get some more money, they pack it away somewhere. But the lower level, they spend almost everything they got.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helps businesses. And remember, Henry Ford had trouble selling his cars, so he reduced the price so that his employees could buy the cars, and
Mm-hmm.
he made more money that
Yeah.
way. And he gave raises, and that meant they could buy more of the stuff they were making. So it helps everybody when you raise the minimum wage. More retail businesses, Walmart and others, have gotten the idea that if you raise the wages of their employees, it helps the businesses across the board. So if we can give people higher wages in Virginia, it will help the economy of Virginia, help businesses, and help the rich, because all of a sudden, you know, businesses are making more money.
That's right.
So it has it's a win-win situation as far as I'm concerned.
So what do you think, I mean, I know that the people that are opposing this, I know that they realize what the benefits are. If you give people more money, they're going to go out and spend it. So why the pushback?
They're blinded. They're blinded to the fact that they just don't want to be told what to do, and they also don't want to pay anybody any more than they have to. They're focusing on the cost side as opposed to the income side. If they could give people more wages, you wouldn't have turnover.
Mm-hmm.
For example, studies show that increasing the minimum wage really doesn't hurt business. In fact, it helps business because you avoid the turnover effect, having to retrain people over and over again that are leaving. You know,
Right.
Some people leave for 5 cents more an hour to another job.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that. You build up a greater sense of employee loyalty. The most important asset any business has, the most important capital is the human capital, is the people.
Yeah.
And that you get loyal people who know their jobs and will stick around, and they will do it because they love the job, but also because they're getting paid well. And so that's the most important thing any business can do. But a lot of the business leaders don't see it that way. They just don't want to be told what to do, and they don't want to pay anybody any more than they absolutely have to.
Okay. I understand. It's sad. But...
It is sad.
All right, well, let's move to one of your other bills. SB 131 was the Prostitution Affirmative Defense.
Well, that was a bill. I've been at the forefront of human trafficking legislation. A couple of years ago, a police officer in Roanoke County stopped a van coming through Roanoke County on the interstate, and the people inside the van seemed scared. They were small, young, and she tried to find something to to arrest the van driver with, and she said there's nothing I could arrest him for, because the people in the van said that they were there voluntarily. They're looking forward to getting a good job up in Pennsylvania or New Jersey or somewhere. Well, it turned out that same van was stopped down in Florida a couple of months later, for human trafficking. They were hauling people back and forth and taking people young, vulnerable, people with minimal family connections, no financial resources. Some may be illegal immigrants or others, runaways, all young, that they were promised the moon and they were not delivering. And they were turning these young people into prostitutes. But also not just that, but labor that they weren't paying for. You know, they would make them work and they're not paying them the wages.
Okay.
So it's a combination both of labor trafficking and prostitution. And so I had legislation that passed. I put it in first in 2014, it failed, and then it passed the Senate, but it failed in the House. In 2015, Senator Overchain had a bill like mine, except his was strictly limited to prostitution rather than the labor part of it. And so my bill was rolled into his, and it passed last year. And this year we looked at other ways to expand the human trafficking legislation. And one was to provide an affirmative defense to those juveniles who are charged with prostitution, and say, look, Judge, I'm a victim. Here's the situation. Maybe I violated the law, but I'm also a victim. You know, and that would be affirmative defense. It failed because the prosecutors didn't want to have it. And so what I did was say I had another bill that was sort of related to that, and that is that to provide services to these people. If a juvenile is petitions filed against the juvenile in juvenile court for delinquency, and the juvenile system is called delinquency, and the charge is prostitution, if they cooperate, then the judge can stay the proceeding, turn it over to a child in need of services petition that the Department of Social Services files to provide services to the child. And if the child cooperates and goes through the program, then the charges will be dropped.
Okay.
This is akin to the affirmative defense concept, that treat them as victims, because that's what they are, rather than as criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And because in every case, they are victims and impressed into a life that they really regret. And we had testimony from a young lady in New York. She was originally in New York and was charged numerous times in New York with prostitution. And she said she couldn't get out of it, didn't know how to get out of it. And she came before the committee and talked about how she was helped through a program like this. And now she's, she's on her way toward living a full life. And she was talking about how horrible it was to be in that kind of environment, that she was victimized by the human trafficking people. And it's a serious problem. It's not only a state problem and a national problem, it's an international problem.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the world now, this is happening, and people are being impressed into a form of enslavement. It's a form of 21st century slavery. That's what it is. And the victims need to be treated as victims more than people who are violating the law. So that's what that's about.
Okay. And so what do you think the prosecutors were so dead set against it?
Well, one of them came in from Henrico County. He actually has a program similar to this program where you can transfer it into a child in need of services program. But his point was, and I can see the point, in order to get them to cooperate, I need to hammer over them to get them to cooperate, because a lot of them are afraid. They're more afraid of their, in fact, this young lady testified she was more afraid of her pimp than she was of the court system. And so we wanted to make sure, but he was doing something similar to this. And so basically I had the bill amended just like they were doing in Henrico County, which was working very well. They got it through the Senate, but the House killed it. So there you go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I know, but I thought it was a good idea.
I think it's a great idea. All right, let's turn to SB 148, which is renewable energy, the SECs to establish third-party power purchase agreements.
I had the first third-party power purchase agreement passed in 2014. It was a pilot program with Dominion Resources. And what it was they had to, there were third parties who developed and produced solar energy, and they would sell it to Dominion, which in turn would sell it to certain universities, University of Richmond, I think Randolph-Macon College up in Asheville, and some other universities like that. And the program is doing very well. What I wanted to do this year was to expand the third-party purchase agreement where merchants would create solar energy, manufacture it, and then sell it directly to the end user. Well, the utilities were against that. They want it to be sold directly to the utilities. And so that's where the problem arises, and I can sort of see their point to a point. I understand their position to a point, but if we could have third-party purchasers go directly to end users, it would explode the use of solar energy. We'd have more solar energy being used in Virginia. Right now, Virginia is ranked 30th in the nation in terms of solar energy, whereas North Carolina is 4th in the nation. They're doing so much more in North Carolina than we are in Virginia. I've heard Germany, something about half the energy in Germany is being produced through solar.
Yes.
And if we can do that in this country, it would mean a whole lot. The price of solar is dropping. By 2019, according to AEP, solar could be cheaper than natural gas. And natural gas, of course, is cheaper than coal.
Right.
So, but of course, solar has so many other benefits. It's renewable. You don't have the carbon emission issue, And so, if we can continue pushing, I know the government wants to do this too, pushing solar energy, it's going to be terrific for the future and less expensive in the future as well. So, so far we've had no progress this year. 2014, we had one bill, my bill passed on the PPA, Power Purchase Agreement. But the other part of this has to do with net metering, that if you put a solar panel on your roof and you want to use it in conjunction with your own electricity, the excess, if you can transfer it to the utility, you should get a credit.
Right.
And they'll give you some credit, but not anywhere near as much of a credit as you think you're entitled to. And so that's the problem of encouraging people to have solar energy in our homes that they can then transfer to the utilities. You can't just have solar. Solar only is operational about 30% of the time because at night the sun's not out and sometimes the weather's bad and so forth. But solar can be a real addition and lower the price overall of electricity. But it'd be nice if the people who have excess solar can transfer it back to the grid and then get appropriate credit. And the complaint now is they're not getting the appropriate credit. But they still have to be on the grid because, like I say, solar's not always there. And so you need something, electricity from the grid when solar's not available.
Well, hopefully, maybe next year, we could bring the bill back and it would be successful.
I hope so. I know the governor is very interested in doing this.
That sounds great. All right. Well, the Alliance for Progressive Virginia is a multi-issue progressive organization, and I wanted to get your position on a few issues that we follow. First off, we've been watching redistricting both on the national level and on the state level. I wanted to get your thoughts on how redistricting has affected the state of Virginia.
Dramatically, yeah. In fact, we basically have lost the General Assembly by the end of the 1990s because of redistricting in 1991. Everybody knows what happened. The African American seats were packed, and that took away a lot of good Democratic voters, and the Republicans extended that, and it made it even worse, so to speak, for the Democratic Party in 2001. In fact, a lawsuit was filed in the House of Delegates saying that the House of Delegates districts were packed and therefore and racially discriminatory because of that. And the circuit judge in Salem ruled in favor of the Democratic Party that the redistricting had to go back and be revised because it was not just unfair to the Democratic Party, it was unfair to African Americans. It would pack so many African Americans into so many districts. And unfortunately, the Supreme Court of Virginia overturned that on a 7-0 basis, which then in 2011, the Republicans wanted to continue that. Now, we tried to hold our line in the Senate, but in the House it was even worse. And so the only way to correct this, in my opinion, some people think we need a commission. I'm not sure that's ever going to pass, for one thing. And the Constitution gives to the General Assembly the sole authority to redistrict every 10 years. Next time will be 2021. You can't do it except for every 10 years. But I think our best hope is in the court system. We've seen that in the federal system, they threw out the districting plan that was adopted in 2011 at the federal system. So now we're going to have hopefully more Democrats elected this fall because of that redistricting.
Yes.
There's a lawsuit involving the House of Delegates plan. It's not going so well right now, I understand, but we'll see what happens. That's still up in the air. But I think overall, the only way, as a practical matter, to solve the problem is through the court system. That's how it was resolved in the early 60s. I mean, redistricting was never a constitutional issue until the series of cases out of Tennessee starting in the early 1960s. 1963, the famous case, one person, one vote case. And that forced the state legislators to go back and redistrict based on the principle of one person, one vote. And I still think the court system is the best hope for changing it. The other hope is that from the standpoint of the Democratic Party, Virginia's changing. Northern Virginia's growing, more Democratic, more Hispanics and more minorities throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the minorities tend to be more Democratic. So as time goes by, I think in the 2020s, Virginia's going to become more of a blue state. It already is a blue state statewide. It's just that the legislative districts are so gerrymandered that it's not. The House has, 66 Republicans, the Senate 21 Republicans. And the other problem is the parties have become so divided. The Republican Party is so controlled now by the Tea Party, basically. And they're more concerned about being primary than they are about a general election. And so, therefore, you tend to get more extreme members of the Republican Party than we had before. There used to be a lot of moderate Republicans. You don't have many moderate Republicans anymore.
Yeah.
And the ones that are outvoted in their own caucus by the much more conservative members. And so the combination of the parties becoming more extreme more divided, more different, the differences being greater between the parties, and the fact that the gerrymandering and the fact that there are very few contested seats anymore means that there's divided government. And that's not good for democracy, it's not good for Virginia. But again, the hope is, I think over time, you're seeing a change in the demographics of Virginia. As Northern Virginia and the Golden Crescent, so to speak, becomes more democratic. Well, at the same time, the more rural areas are very Republican. Like Mark Warner got 57% of Southwest Virginia when he first ran in 2008. Of course, he ran with Obama, too, and there was a big turnout.
Yeah.
And then we ran again in 2014 without a presidential year. He got 37% in Southwest Virginia. He dropped 20%. Mark Warner, from 57 to 37% in Southwest Virginia. And that's more and more the case, that Democrats can't get elected in rural areas, Republicans can't get elected in urban areas in Northern Virginia. So, but I think as time goes by, it favors the Democratic Party. And also, like I say, the only way to change this is, I think, practically speaking, is through the court system.
And you brought up a good topic about how there's, one party's on one side and one party's on another. And you can see it here in the state and in Congress. How do we bridge that gap? Because it seems to be getting worse, not better.
Well, you see it in a number of bills. Like today, we debated the Clean Power Plan. The Republicans eked through, on a straight party line vote, a bill that says only the legislature can approve the state Clean Power Plan that EPA requires the states to do. It's given to the governor to do this through the DEQ, Division of Department of Environmental Quality in Virginia. But the Republicans wanted to say, we don't trust the DEQ, we don't trust the governor, we don't trust the EPA. We as the legislature want to approve whatever clean power plan that we're going to have. Now, what that does is politicize the whole process. It's a method of killing any clean power plan, and they know it, and that's why they want to do it that way. And so every Democrat voted against the bill. Every Republican voted for it. The governor vetoed it, and it came back, and it was the veto was sustained because we have 19 Democrats who voted to sustain the veto, and you need the other side needed 27 votes, and they only had 21 votes to overturn the veto. So that's a good example of a bill that's straight party line. We're seeing more and more bills that are just straight party line bills, whether it be on marriage issues or abortion issues, a whole series of issues that are just straight party line votes.
I understand. Okay. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask you about is the state of mental health treatment here in Virginia. What do you think about that? What do you foresee?
Well, we've made some progress, but obviously we need more. We set up a permanent commission that Senator Deeds in the Senate is heading up. And because of the tragedy that happened to his family, he agreed to head up that. He's in a position to know more than perhaps anybody because of what happened to his family. Several things. We need more money. And we found out after the 2007 tragedy at Virginia Tech, in 2008, Governor Kane gave us $42 million more money. But also we revised the laws, improved the laws. I was on this subcommittee in the Senate, co-chaired with Senator Howell, the subcommittee on mental health reform. And we did a lot. We did some landmark legislation, a whole series of things in 2009, plus the new money. Well, it turned out about when Senator Deeds' son had that tragic situation in November of 2013, looking back at it, we realized that money was gone. From 2008 to 2013, the General Assembly just didn't, the economy collapsed, we had all, financial problems, and the money was down, we were had a shortfall in 2009, of course, 2010, 2011, because of the national economy. But the first thing to go was money for mental health, and that was a tragedy. And so it turned out that one of the problems there in 2013 was the money was gone, and nobody really knew it was gone. Plus, they didn't go forward with some of the reforms they were supposed to do, such as having real-time websites about where the beds are. And they were supposed to, they just didn't do it. They didn't get around to doing it. And so, so we tried to fill some of those gaps. But this is an ongoing problem. I'm glad we have a more or less a semi-permanent commission looking at this and continuing each year to plug the holes, to solve the problems as they come along. And I mean, nobody can envision every problem that might come down the pike, but at least we're trying. I think we're making great strides. But again, money is a major part of the problem. You need to have mental health treatment professionals, and that's something we just got to keep working on.
And my understanding too is that with regards to the real-time information, that there is still some problems with that. To your understanding, has that been improved at all?
I'm told it's been improved. I don't know the details, but I'm told they have worked on it and made some improvements. Like the thing about what happened at Tech, the shooter at Tech was several things. We plugged the holes. He bought two guns, and yet he was adjudicated a danger to himself or others. He was not supposed to have guns, but the national NICS, they called it a National Instant Background Check Program, didn't have his name. Virginia had a glitch in Virginia law where his name wasn't submitted because it wasn't required to. That's just one thing. Nobody monitored. He was supposed to get treatment. Nobody monitored that, and those are two of the bills I held. I carried back in 2008, for example. He was supposed to be. Now people are supposed to be monitored to make sure if they get the treatment, if they're ordered to get treatment, they actually do get the treatment, or they brought back before the judge. One of the two. Right. So we're constantly looking at the mental health issues, and it's a continuing problem.
Okay. All right. Well, I have one last thing, and I want to turn to a case that you actually represented, because as I'd said earlier, you are an attorney, and I wanted to ask you about Zeran versus America Online. And the reason why I'm asking you is because it's considered a very important case, and it still has repercussions for today. So could you talk a little bit about that and its legacy?
Yeah, Kenneth Zeran was a sports promoter and developer in Seattle, Washington. And somebody posted on AOL some very defamatory information following the Oklahoma City bombings that were just horrible. If I told you what they were, you'd be disgusted. And he was very upset, and he contacted AOL and asked them to take it down. Now, under the bill that was passed by Congress in the early 90s, the Communications Decency Act. Under that act, the internet service providers like AOL have the authority under the Good Samaritan clause of that act. They have the authority to take down improper material on notice of what's on the internet. And if somebody defames you, and you should be able to contact them and say, please take it down, this is hurting my business, and whatever, so forth. And they have the authority to do that. Nobody questions that. What we said, and they didn't, by the way, they didn't take it down, and that was the problem. They eventually did. But the suit was based on the fact that after notice, the internet service providers, if they have the authority to take it down, they have a duty to take it down too, and can be held liable if they don't take it down when they are specifically notified of the problem, and after reasonable investigation, they fail to take it down, then they should be held liable. That's what the suit was about. It turned out that the Fourth Circuit ruled that no, the internet service providers are like the telephone wires. They don't monitor it, and they don't control it. It's whatever goes through it just goes through it. And we said no, it's more like the distributor of books or magazines, that they're not the publisher, but upon notice that there's something in those magazines or books that's defamatory or improper, unlawful, they have the duty to take it down, and they didn't. And so that's what the case is all about. But like I say, the Fourth Circuit ruled that the internet service providers were just like the telephone wires, as opposed to like a distributor of magazines or newspapers. Okay. And so I still think to this day it was wrong. And I have gotten inquiries over the years about Zeran versus AOL, and about how the case, what the case was all about. In fact, there was a book in Japan that was written in part about who polices the internet, and they interviewed me in Roanoke, and they have there's a part of that book that discusses AOL versus Zeran versus AOL. It's kind of interesting because they sent me a copy of the book. It's all in Japanese.
Oh dear.
But the only thing I can read in there is the picture of me and the gentleman who interviewed me, plus the words AOL, Communications Decency Act, and Zeran. These are in English. The rest of the book is all Japanese.
Oh boy. Oh boy. So you're going to have it translated to read it in full.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh boy. All right. Well, Thank you so much, Senator Edwards, for taking the time out of your busy schedule
Glad
and
to.
meeting with us today and talking with me and having us interview you. And
I appreciate it.
really
Thank
appreciate
you. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that's